it's fine to have that little memorable thing that gives someone a reason to remember you, but then they also have to remember you for the key two things, which are being really, really nice, but being incredibly helpful or useful. Because a nice person who's not helpful is just not all that valuable.
Welcome to The Successful Pitch. If you're a startup founder struggling with your investor pitch, we can teach you the steps to get funded fast. We interview investors who share their pitch funding criteria. We also talk with founders who share their startup funding success stories. Funding strategist John Livesay is your host each episode. Having helped many businesses craft their funding pitch, Inc. magazine now calls him the Pitch Whisperer. John will help you learn to craft your own concise and compelling pitch using the same tactics he used helping businesses during his 15-year award-winning sales career at Condé Nast, combined with insights from his best-selling book, The 7 Most Powerful Selling Secrets. Once you are pitch perfect from the tips you learn on this podcast, John can make the all-important warm introductions to the right investors who have appeared on the show. Your funding success begins with the successful pitch.
Today's guest on The Successful Pitch is Lylan Masterman, who is a VC at White Star Capital. He talks about the importance of branding yourself and branding your company, that they have to be in line. He said, what are you doing for your personal brand that can make you memorable, whether it's something you wear or something you are known for? He said, it's not enough just to be nice. You have to be nice and helpful. He said, everything going on talks about investors love to invest in people that have a passion for what they're doing. He says, tell me a story that gets me excited. It doesn't have to be something that's necessarily a exciting product. Money is sexy just in and of itself. So have your passion for what you're doing. He's personally passionate about the Internet of all things and tells us some really fascinating things that are coming down the pike as it relates to that. The interview begins in 45 seconds, right after this information on how you can get funded fast.
Are you a funder struggling with your investor pitch? Do you need warm introductions to the right investors to get your startup funded? Do you need a funding roadmap to get you there fast? All of this and more can be found in Crack the Funding Code. Join host John Livesay and Judy Robinett, best-selling author of How to Be a Power Connector and board member of Illuminate Ventures, on their free Crack the Funding Code webinar. Simply go to Judy Robinett, that's JudyRobinett.com, and click on the webinar tab to see how to tap into their network of investors from around the world. There's a link in the show notes as well. You're only one click away from getting funded fast.
Hi, and welcome to the Successful Pitch Podcast. Today's guest is Lylan Masterman, who's a venture capital investor at White Star Capital in New York. He has primarily focused on late seed and Series A investments. He's also a Kauffman Fellow, where he's doing academic research project on the Internet of Things. He previously worked as a software engineer in product management for 15 years, and he joined Atlas division of A Quantitative in 2004, where he focused on big data. He helped lead the company's rich media advertising technology platform. He's also led product organizations for 4 early-stage companies. And prior to joining that, he worked at Microsoft, and he's also worked at Sierra Ventures, which is a San Francisco-based VC firm. So we'll be sure to ask him the differences between San Francisco and New York, because I'm sure there's quite a few. Lylan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure.
Before we get into all the wonderful things you're doing at White Star Capital now, would you take us back to your days of being a software developer at IBM and then being a program manager at Microsoft? Did you have a vision that you were eventually going to get into VC, or how did you go from that to where you are now?
Yeah, I was a computer science geek, and I went to the University of Waterloo, which for people who are not familiar with the school, it's considered the MIT of Canada. For the people in France, it's the Polytechnique of Canada. And from there, my last internship or co-op in the 90s was at Microsoft Web TV in California. And my manager at the time, we discussed career options, and there were some people down the hall who were product managers, or by Microsoft parlance, program managers. And we talked and we kind of agreed that that could be a really good path for me, because I was getting frustrated spending hours on end trying to fix a bug in the code that was a missing semicolon. I liked the interpersonal aspect while still leveraging my technology background. And so, yeah, I went to Microsoft full time in Redmond. I was on the first team to launch VisualStudio.net. So the first ever .NET team in C# and J#. And then I went to a company that I'd never heard of at the time, actually, in Seattle, called Atlas, part of Aquantive. And we doubled and tripled the business year over year. And it was just fantastic. And I ended up having 4 jobs simultaneously. I was running the rich media product, the behavioral targeting product, user experience, and internationalization all at the same time, because that's what you do when a company is growing quickly. And then in my last year there, Microsoft acquired us for $6 billion, which at the time was larger than all of Microsoft's other acquisitions combined.
That's quite an exit there.
Yeah, Skype subsequently surpassed us. You know, what was interesting there is that Mike Galligan was one of the co-founders of Aquantive. And at one point, I approached Mike for a little bit of mentorship. I was considering to go do my MBA, and I was already in my 30s, so it was now or never. And so Mike was a great mentor for me. And in the discussions, we talked about the history of Aquantive. And you know, the web was different back then. Knowledge about venture capital was different back then. Your show was not on back then.
That's true.
And Mike, when he told me about the history of starting Aquantive, which was then called Avenue A, he told me about how he and his co-founder started it, but also how he raised money from venture capitalists. And I didn't even know what a venture capitalist was. But similar to how my manager at Microsoft in the 90s urged me to think about product, Mike didn't necessarily urge me to think about venture, quite the opposite, but he did awaken my interest into it, even though he didn't necessarily think that'd be necessarily be the best choice of career, because you know it's a dark side and all. And when I started digging more and more into it, and I thought I might just absolutely love this, and it was perfect timing for my career because I was going already to business school. Business school is a great time to try something new, right? And while at business school, I decided that I was going to try venture capital. I did not know that the economy was going to tank and that I'd be looking for an internship in 2009.
Oh boy.
Right? So what I did is I networked. And for me, what that meant was I looked up every single VC firm I was aware of or could learn about online. I read the bios of every partner and principal in the firm. And I would find the one person in the firm who I thought had the most similarities to me, right? Or most affinity to me, as some people put it. And I would email that person. And I'll give you the colloquial version of the email. Of course, the email is very formal. But the colloquial version of the email basically said, hey, we have this in common. We both studied mathematics. We're both Canadian. We both worked in online advertising, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what you do for your career is interesting. Do you have 20 minutes? I'd like to pick your brain. Now, a lot of people are, yeah, go ahead.
I was just like, I love that so much because I'm constantly telling the listeners, you must do your homework on the investors you are fortunate enough to pitch. And what you just did was, this is also obviously how you got a job, but it's that same, look at the similarities because you want to make sure that who you're even approaching for money has a lot of things in common with you, whether it's background, experience, connections. And so what you just shared is gold. I love it. Keep going.
Yep. Yeah. And then one of the investors I reached out to is a New York investor, Jeff Judge. Maybe we should check to see if it's okay with him that we use his name. And in my conversation with him at the end of the call, he said, hey, Lylan, I like you. I think you have some good potential. There's no space at my firm to take on an intern, but let me introduce you to somebody. And so he introduced me to his friend, Mark Fernandez. And Mark's admin wrote me back and said, Mark would be happy to have a call. And I did what you're trained to do, lie. Right? I very much would appreciate a call, but I happen to actually be going to the Bay Area in 2 weeks. Is Mark available to meet in person? She said yes. Then I booked my plane ticket. And then met Mark in person, and Mark made it very clear to me at the beginning of the meeting. They had never hired an intern before. They had no desire to. And what I subsequently learned also is that the head of Sierra Ventures, the founder of Sierra Ventures, is Peter Wendell, who actually teaches venture capital at Stanford GSB. So one can reason that if Sierra were to bring on an MBA intern, it would be from someone from GSB. But by the end of the call, or by the end of the in-person meeting, Mark seemed interested. I think my technical background combined with the fact that I was already in my 30s, didn't need to be overly coached, had an impact. He knew that he could bring me on and I could run independently. I just owe so much to Mark for giving me that break. It was an absolute joy. From there, I had a great experience at Sierra, and then I applied for the Kauffman Fellows program.
Oh, let me just ask you to pause because there's another gem there. It's the objections you got at Sierra.
Yeah.
I mean, most people would just say, oh well. So, lying is not something we ever, propose people do, but you were willing to go the extra mile, put your own money and spend your own money, your own dime to get yourself there for that interview that didn't look promising, but you still were willing to do it. So that's that extra mile that a lot of people like, I'm not going to do that unless I really think I have a good shot, but you still went. You get there, all you do is hear a bunch of objections about why they never do it. And if they do it, it's going to be from somebody from someplace else. And then you are able to turn that around. That's the kind of tenacity and persuasive selling skills or storytelling that's required to get someone like you now to say yes, correct?
Yeah, very much so. The idea of what you said earlier, of researching somebody, of understanding their backgrounds, understanding your commonalities, if there are some. You don't need to have somebody. At least show that you researched me and you didn't just simply do a copy and paste, right? Maybe we're drastically different about something and you want to talk about that. That's fine.
Right.
But just show me that you didn't do a copy and paste and that you're willing to do a little bit of effort, just the way I continue to do.
Well, it could even be somewhat playful, right? I see you speak French. I eat French fries. Does that count, right? I mean, something.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't received that one, but yeah, at least it would show some level of research.
Right.
Yeah.
And some playfulness and some human, like if you want to stand out from the crowd, sometimes you have to do something a little out there like that. All right. So you're doing well there. And then suddenly tell us about the Kauffman experience.
Yeah. So at Kellogg, Aziz Jalani was a year ahead of me, and he'd been selected for the Kauffman Fellows program. I'd learned a little bit about it from him. And I looked up the list of Kauffman Fellows through the history of the program, and there are many fellows who are part of the who's who of venture capital. And the program is a 2-year program where we meet once a quarter for 3 or 4 consecutive days, right? And in the times that we meet once a quarter, there is a fixed curriculum of trying. The curriculum is specifically on how to make us a better technology investor. And so the curriculum doesn't relate to term sheets, and financial terms. It's assumed that we learn that on the job or we've already learned it. And if we don't, then we can just ask. Let me give you 2 of my favorite examples of the curriculum. One example was how to be a better board member. And so what Kauffman did is that they invited internationally recognized VCs who are known as being exceptional board members.
Wow. And now is this advisory board members or a board member of directors?
The board of directors.
Okay.
Right? Because generally as a venture capitalist, that's what we do.
You're on the board.
And
just want to clarify for the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. And that training was outstanding. And then there was another session.
Before I let you jump off of that, do you have 1 or 2 takeaways that what makes a great, or how can you become a better board of director?
Well, everything that happens in Kauffman is Kauffman confidential.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No. But what I can say, because a friend of mine actually recently published this, and so he leaked the information first, if you will.
Fair enough. Yes.
In addition to having great board members come in and speak to us, we had an entrepreneur come in and speak to us, a well-recognized CEO. And at one point, the question was asked of him about his board and his level of appreciation for the board. And there were many of his board members who he felt did not contribute as much as they're capable of. They were not as helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought that all those individuals had the networks, had the skills, had the intelligence, had all the attributes required to be helpful, but just had never invested enough time and effort and mental energy. And when we asked him, which of these people would you want on your board again? The answer was was disappointingly low. And the key takeaways there were often about some of the simple stuff, John. Simple. Read the deck as a board member. Read the deck a week in advance, assuming the CEO sends it to you a week in advance.
Yes.
And if you have questions, start asking those questions in advance so that you're not stalling the board meeting unnecessarily.
We're going to tweet that out. Time, effort, and mental energy. Those are the three key elements to be successful in anything, whether it's pitching for funding, being a good board member. I mean, it's all, like you said, simple things, but put in your time, put in the effort, and not just effort of being busy, but mental energy. I love that. That's such a great line.
If you just do what intuitively feels like the right thing, and you make your portfolio company a priority, that should naturally occur.
Yep.
And then there's a lot of the small things too. So your behavior in the board meeting, how often are you checking your cell phone or email, right? Are you writing down notes for yourself about what's been discussed and about your follow-up and your action items about how to be helpful? That's important stuff.
Sure. Well, it shows you care, right?
Yeah, it does. And we should care, right? Because our job is on the line. Our personal income is on the line. Our reputations are on the line. And in the life of most companies out there, the CEO is driving the company, but there can be one or two seminal moments where an outsider, as in a board member, will observe something that the operational team, the CEO, the C-levels, the VPs, will not observe because they're stuck in the weeds. And it takes an attentive board member to recognize a seminal moment and to make a certain recommendation, or to even ask the intelligent question that allows the CEO or the team to reach a certain conclusion.
Well, I love that. That's so great because it works both ways, doesn't it? Right? When you're pitching someone like you to get funding, you better be sure your phone's turned off. You better be sure you're listening to what you say and maybe even taking a note during the pitch meeting, right? So you show that you're engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fine to have your laptop open the whole time if it's clear that you're taking notes.
Right.
And you're not overly multitasking.
Yeah.
Or if there is something urgent in your life going on and you're expecting a certain phone call, just say so.
Right.
One little thing that I try to do, and I think I do more often than not, is when I do have a meeting with someone, I know I have another meeting coming up thereafter. Instead of being the guy who's always checking his cell phone for the time or checking his watch, I set myself an alarm. Right? And so that way there, I'm not rudely checking the time. I trust that my alarm will notify me when it's time to start wrapping up the meeting.
Right. Nice.
Just proper etiquette.
That's very, very helpful. All right. So you're meeting once a quarter. Obviously, it's a huge commitment. How to learn to be a better board member. Is there anything else you can share from those confidential quarterly meetings of what you've learned or no?
Well, there was another session on how to best define your personal brand and your firm's brand.
Love that.
Right? And you can imagine that the VCs that we invited to speak on the branding side were different than the board member side.
Sure.
Right? Because some people are much better at one than the other. And so for us to be able to pick and choose and learn from the best of each part of the curriculum is key to Kauffman. And on the branding, it's all the normal stuff that we talk about, just applied to venture. So branding is especially difficult for VCs who are considered generalists. And a generalist is defined as a VC who invests in many different categories.
Right. You don't specialize. Yeah. We only do medical or we only do fintech. Then people will say, okay, that's your brand. But If you're general, but there's still so much branding that can be defined, and I can't wait to talk about White Star's branding in a second. But please keep going about what is it that I'm really curious about what they might have told you about how important it is to have your own personal brand.
Yeah, your personal brand and your firm brand need to be very complementary. I certainly hope so. But at the same time, we are each individuals, and we each have our own way of being memorable within the firm, and that's what it is. I hope with all firms. And so, be it that you organize events, be it that you wear some kind of peacock, to use a term, right? But at the end of the day, those are great hooks into what is the core of you and your firm, right?
Yes.
So it's fine to have that little memorable thing that gives someone a reason to remember you, but then they also have to remember you for the key two things, which are being really, really nice, but being incredibly helpful or useful. Because a nice person who's not helpful is just not all that valuable. Right?
Oh, we're going to tweet that out. You must be nice and helpful, not just nice.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. And there's some people out there who are known as the nice guys or the nice women, and it's important to be nice, but the buck does not stop there.
I also like this concept of your personal brand is defined by what can you do to be memorable. That's another great tweet. It's so important. So is it something you wear, a certain hairstyle, colored socks, or you're known as the go-to guy for events, or you're known as the go-to guy for being able to help people with their pitch or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like there's also, that stuff is a little bit kitschy, but it works as long as it's done effectively. And then there's just the core fundamental parts of branding. One of the firms that I admire the most in the whole wide world is Emergence Capital. Emergence is truly a top decile firm, a fantastic portfolio. The people I know there I can't speak highly enough of. And at Emergence, they define themselves early on as the firm that invests in SaaS before people even knew what SaaS was. And they use a couple other terms around SaaS because they started investing in SaaS before the term SaaS, I think, was even defined. And they invested early on in Salesforce.com. And so that's a strong form of branding. All the other stuff helps, right? First round capital. Well, what do they invest in, right? There's something nice about either by your name or just how you define yourself externally, that people know you for something important and that's applicable to many entrepreneurs.
Well, let's talk about the branding of White Star Capital. Before the show started, you told me a little story about how they came up with that name White Star for the VC.
Yeah, so White Star, fundamentally, we are a transatlantic firm. We have investments in many parts of Western Europe, including London, Paris, Berlin, Stockholm, and then also in North America, including New York, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa. We even have some investments in LA and San Francisco. And looking at the history of what brings both sides of the Atlantic together, well, White Star Cruise Line, I might not have the exact details straight here, but it's effectively the first commercial cruise line across the Atlantic.
Perfect. That says it all right there. And even the little logo has a white star, obviously, and instantly brands you as a place that is international and cutting edge if you're being the first and all that other great stuff. Now, in your bio, I talked that you lived in San Francisco as a VC and now you're in New York as a VC. I rarely get the chance to talk to people who've done both coasts, and they're so different. What would you say are some of the differences about being a VC based in New York versus San Francisco?
Yeah, the differences are shrinking. I must say that because New York is becoming very much more focused on all the industries of technology. It's no longer so strongly focused on ad tech and fintech and fashion and media and so on. That being said, the competitive dynamics in the West Coast historically in the last few years, even though it is slowing down a little bit now, are different. The time it takes to make an investment in the Bay Area has shrunk. because of the competitive situation. And so my friends who are Bay Area investors, in order to make the best investments, some of them have learned to be more proactive at creating investment theses or mini theses, if you will. So identifying subsector of tech and researching it in advance so that when it comes time to actually speak with a certain company that's trying to raise the amount of money that you generally invest, that you already have your market knowledge. And so you don't need to do catch up. And so the reliance that a lot of VCs have on investing in companies that's introduced to them, that's decreasing. It still exists. It's still very strong. But the proactive investors who go out there and say, here's what we invest in. Here's where we've established some thought leadership. Here's where we have strong knowledge. That allows you to make investment decisions a lot more quickly.
Now, one of the pride and glories of your portfolio is the Dollar Shave Club, which is such a success story. Can you share with us where you got involved? Was it seed into Series A, or how did you get involved with Dollar Shave Club?
Yeah, so we are investors in a company called Science. And Science is also located in LA, as is Dollar Shave Club. And Science is effectively a startup incubator. They call themselves a studio, and that's really what they are, is a startup studio. And so one of the startup studio companies that came out of Science was Dollar Shave Club. And by being an investor in Science, the head of Science is very good at letting his investors know when there's something good coming from his program, right? From his studio.
Right.
And that's when we learned about Dollar Shave Club. And this was before the video came out. And so it was very good timing. A funny story with Dollar Shave Club, I was having coffee with a friend of mine in venture capital a couple months ago. And he had taken a deep look at Dollar Shave Club, but he ended up passing, and his reasons were very sound at the time, right? No product, no traction. They say they're creating some video that's going to go viral. Yeah, right. And then of course they do the video, it goes viral. And all his friends who didn't even know that he had even looked at Dollar Shave Club are now sending him the video.
It's kind of like rubbing it in your face, right? But you can't predict what's going to go viral or not. That's for sure.
Yeah. And they didn't know that they were rubbing it in his face, as he put it.
Right.
But yeah. And he was like, darn it. But looking back at his notes, his logic was sound.
Sure. But somehow you still did get involved with that.
Yeah.
And it's been a huge success.
It worked out really, really well. The most recent round of financing was quite large. And the number of products that the company now has, it's a lot more than just shaving products.
Oh, I know. I'm a customer. Everything from what to wipe your butt with to, it's hilarious branding, but it stays consistent. It's all funny. Yeah. It's great. And talk about disruptive. I just love it. Now, can you share with our audience, since it's called The Successful Pitch, what you think makes a good pitch?
Yeah, ultimately, giving a good pitch, I liken it to the word story. And I assume some other VCs have told you the same thing. It has to be a story that gets an investor excited. Now, don't get me wrong, right? Some of the best stories for me are really unsexy, boring businesses. But at the end of the day, money is sexy.
There's a good tweet. Yep.
And that can be misinterpreted by some people. But people who understand the crux of what I'm saying, the genesis of what I'm saying, is that, you can be doing a startup on some improving database server, something, right? And you tell your friends your non-geek friends about improving something in databases, or you tell your parents, if your parents are not technically inclined, about improving something in database stuff. And that doesn't sound all that glamorous in a way, right? It's not like working on a social media startup, but still a company that's working on massively improving a database in some form, or doing some artificial intelligence product for the enterprise. Those can often also be really, really compelling businesses that will generate meaningful revenue and meaningful recurring revenue.
It's great. And do you often have people come to you at seed and then you're there for their second rounds? Is that a common experience?
Yeah. So there are times where we are the first institutional investor. And sometimes that's often the seed round. And then there are times where there are already great seed investors, and it's time for the company to raise an A. And those seed investors, they don't have the capital because the check size gets too big for them. And then we're there for the A.
Nice.
Ultimately, that's a core part of the White Star strategy, is to do the late seed and the Series A, and then help our companies get to the B.
Nice.
And that's very important to help them get to that next step.
What would you say is, besides growth and traction and hitting the milestones, are some of the things that are so important to help somebody get from Series A to Series B?
Yeah, the quality of the team, right?
It goes back just to the same as the seed. It's amazing how that never goes away, does it?
Yeah, but suddenly when you're trying to raise for every round, every subsequent round, there are higher expectations on the team. So one of my colleagues, Christian Hernandez out of London, one of the founders of White Star, he blogged about this recently, how it's important to be leading a company that is today's company, right? Not yesterday's company. And so today's company, as this, the CEO may have been also historically doing most of the finance or heading up product. But at some point, the company should get big enough that the CEO should not have time to do both. Right? And so you need to bring in that head of finance or that head of product, et cetera, et cetera. And it's fine to go and dabble a little bit in those areas and to coach in those areas. But ultimately, at the end of the day, as your company continues to scale, you need to bring on leaders in each of those job functions. Including,
I would assume, a more impressive board of advisors than you might have at a seed round, correct?
The board of advisors can be helpful. When an entrepreneur tells me that he or she has an extraordinary board of advisors, I look at the name, I look at the titles and all that. But then what matters most to me is, okay, these are great names and all, but what have they done for you lately? Right? How active are they? Are they people that are in the office regularly, or are they people that you have a call with 1 hour a week? Or are they people who say, yeah, call me up, I'll try to help you, and at the end of the day, they end up helping you once or twice a year.
Yeah, very different levels of involvement. Yep.
Yeah, and that's critical, because at the end of the day, the people who are working the greatest number of hours on average in the company are often, not always, but often the most influential.
Interesting. Now, is there a book that you would recommend founders read about life or funding or anything you just think is important for them to know as people?
Yeah, so I'm going to avoid a lot of the obvious books that are written by Mark Andreessen and all those kinds of fabulous books, by the way, Brad Feld, et cetera. And I'll go a little bit off the beaten path. There is one book that I still remember something from, even though I read it in 2009. And the book is called The Trusted Advisor. And in The Trusted Advisor, they talk about the formula for being a trusted advisor. And really, it's not about being a trusted advisor. It's a formula for trust.
I love it.
Right? And the formula, I call it the Christ formula, and you'll see why. To develop trust, you must have a high level of credibility, reliability, intimacy, and then a controlled level of self-interest, right? CRIS. And I tried to break this rule. I tried to find errors in this, and ultimately it really did come down to those four: credibility, reliability, intimacy, and just don't have too much self-interest.
Wow. Controlled self-interest. That is a really tough one for a lot of people. And it all goes back to have a little empathy for your customer and a little empathy for the investor, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. It's been such a pleasure having you on. Lylan, is there a way that people can follow you on social media? What's your Twitter and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so just a little quick correction. Its name is Lylan.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right. Yeah, so my Twitter handle is Lylan M. I don't publish much on LinkedIn. Actually, LinkedIn, I think I'm also Lylan M. Okay. And then I have a specific blogging strategy that I haven't launched yet, but stay tuned. Ultimately, through the White Star Network, I'll be publishing through there, probably on Medium. Who knows?
Oh, that's great. Well, it's interesting because I take the podcast and transcribe that to Medium as well. So we'll be able to do that as well for you. Well, thanks again. It's been a pleasure. You've given us so many. I love this trusted advisor criteria and how important it is for the team to continue to evolve as the funding gets bigger. Those are incredible takeaways.
I appreciate it. Thanks, John.
Thanks for listening to the Successful Pitch podcast. If you like the show, please go to iTunes and write a review, and encourage your friends to write reviews too. It really helps get the word out. You know, people say that the longest distance is between someone's mouth and their wallet. People can tell you they're going to invest, but when it comes time to write the check, they don't do it. So how do you get people to say yes and then follow through? Visualize yourself on the left side of a riverbank, and you have to cross the river, and on the other side of the river is where the funding happens. So first, you make up your idea, and then you make it real, and then you make it reoccur. Once you start dipping your toe into the water to get the funding, that's where I can help. I get you across that river faster than you would on your own, with a lot less frustration than you will get when you hear a bunch of no's and you don't know why. So if you want some help getting funded faster with less frustration, go to my free funding webinar, sellingsecretsforfunding.com/webinar, and sign up and get in-depth information on how you can get funded fast. Thanks.